and introduce our speaker this evening, Gayatri Spivak. She is University Professor at Columbia University, New York. She is without doubt one of the most distinguished, respected and formidable theorists of our day. Her work on literature, deconstruction, Marxisms, post-colonialism and feminism is justly admired throughout the Academy and beyond. Her published work includes In Other Worlds, Essays in Cultural Politics, Outside in the Teaching Machine, a critique of post-colonial reason towards a history of the vanishing present, Death of a Discipline, and Other Asias. If this were not enough, she is also a translator, rendering into English several volumes of texts by Mahaswati Devi and Jacques Derrida. She also founded the Pares Chandra and Sivani Chakravorty Memorial Education Project, dedicated to education as democratic entitlement in West Bengal. She's an educator and an activist, but above all, a thinker, and it is my great privilege to invite her to speak this evening on the subject of rearranging desires.
Is that in the nooks and crannies of these social science pronouncements by social scientists who are not particularly weeping for the humanities, there is in fact a cry for the kind of training that in fact this kind of a consortium model humanities undertaking can provide. And I said only half in jest at the seminar, I cited Obama. Obama, as I said at the seminar, is a Columbia graduate and like one of our very, very brilliant graduate students who actually found a great deal of power in his hands. And in order to rearrange desires, rather than look at only at, of course he is in fact not able to look at that at all, the collapsing of the investment and the commercial banks and so on. Trying to regulate is a very difficult thing. But he is trying by bringing people in, he is trying to impose behavioral economics on both consumer and capitalist. In other words, changing the rational choice model. Behavioral economics, as I was saying from at the seminar, is not, you will forgive me for citing the seminar constantly in this way, but because it really was an educative experience for me. As I was saying it, I was saying that that model, the model of behavioral economics, takes for granted a model of the human mind which for most humanities teachers, most philosophers, most literary critics, and I hope all, is woefully pre-critical and simple. So therefore, we should, again, I mean I quoted Offe, I quoted Tilly, but we should again realize that if this kind of work has to take place, I mean this is very high level conjecture that yes, some kind of rearranging of desire has to take place. Let's bring in Cass Sunstein and Samantha Powers. They are academics too, well placed, Chicago and Harvard, but nonetheless. So therefore we ought to see that we are in fact capable of doing things which are being called for, and on the other hand we are not, we are waiting for the barbarians, as it were. So this is my second form then, my second point, that there is already in the implementation of the Marxist blueprint, as if, you see, this is why one must supplement vanguardism through this kind of education. This is where a lot of new work on Gramsci is being done, so I may be wrong, but this is where Gramsci begins to make a good deal of sense. So therefore, this notion of actually supplementing vanguardism by the kind of education that I know this kind of extremely variegated consortium will propagate, I believe we will be doing something that the times call for. So, and I'll now go on to the last bit, and I will make an end there. How to copy. How to copy a philosophical program into an actual blueprint of action, or how not to copy. So what I tried to say is that in the Marxist project, because in fact this kind of double bind concealed in the big words like value and social, they were not recognized. And you see, this was not Marx's project. I mean, he was not someone who was supposed to think it through academically, etc. He had a goal. He was in the 19th century in a place where the working class was getting destroyed. Capitalism was, in fact, in a place where it was completely rampant, and he was focused on showing to the workers that they were the agents of production, that they should have a kind of homeopathic attitude toward the commodification of their labor and should use their commodified labor to turn capital around to social. Okay, cool. But so it was not his obligation to think about things. It was not his obligation, I feel like a bullfighter. It was not his obligation to think about this particular problem. We, if we are not fundamentalists, we ought to be the ones who think it through, that there is something there in those perionymic double-binding kind of problems with those huge words with a meaning in the history of the world. It's the difference between job security, unionism, and another kind. That's the sort of thing that I'm talking about. So it seems to me that I have said just a word about Marx, but I would like to speak at somewhat greater length about Derrida before I end, because Derrida, in fact, talks about this at great length, how not to imitate him. That is because he's interested also in the political stuff, right? But he knows that this is going to look like something easily imitable. I remember very clearly sitting at dinner in his house with the guy from Confrontation, who was René Major, the Canadian, who was doing deconstructive psychoanalysis. And you know, I was very silent because these are biggies, you know, and it was just kind of a little nothing. So I'm sitting silently as they're talking. And then finally, you know, René turns towards me and says, and what do you think? You know, as he's talking, and Derrida is kind of smiling, saying his stuff. So I said, taking my courage in both hands, I said, I do not believe a deconstructive psychoanalysis is possible. And Derrida looks at me and says, brava. He said, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. You can't take it and make it into a nameable practice. Then in the piece called Moklos, remember, he suggests that those who say that they are actually being deconstructive in their institutional practice, and I'm quoting because, in fact, Nicholas, you were there at the meeting where he first read this paper, remember, in Alabama. He says, every day rigor is contravened in some way when you say, I'm being deconstructive, I don't believe in the intending subject, all that stuff. Until, he says, in a kind of unfortunate pun, rigor mortis sets in. So to an extent, and you know, again in Passions, he says that, you know, there are very good-hearted ethical deconstructivists who think deconstruction is just the best possible thing, and so on. So what I would like to do is end by reading two passages from Derrida, giving my own comments about how he himself, this is old material, but I mean Derrida's old material, it's from de la grammatologie, but this doesn't in fact change. Let's go. Yes, that will be maybe another 15 minutes, which will bring me to like 45 minutes. That's cool for a launch, right? Okay. So, the first passage that I will read is a clear definition or description of the double bind resident in wanting to deconstruct, rearranging desires, wanting to deconstruct. Now remember, the desires that one thinks about rearranging are always involved with, you know, who is going to rearrange mine, right? So that's, that's what I was talking about in the beginning, desire to know, the will to knowledge, volonté de savoir. So the double bind resident and wanting to deconstruct. You must live in your object, work as your object, and go under in a specific